This is the real mystery of Baalbek, how these stones came to be there, why they were placed there, and specifically how they were transported into place.
Baalbek has defied logic for thousands of years.
Baalbek, as we know from the archaeological evidence, must have existed during the Neolithic period, between 6,000 to 8,000 years or even 9,000 years BC.
Its stones are heavier than modern cranes can lift, yet they were placed with impossible precision long before recorded history.
It consists of 3 huge blocks. Each one of the trilithon blocks is around about 22 meters long.
For generations, scholars argued over who built them: gods, giants, or something no one can explain.
Because some of the stones are of such magnitude that modern machinery is incapable of putting them there. But somehow our ancestors were able to do this.
But when scientists finally uncovered what those stones were hiding, the real mystery of Baalbek came into focus. And what they found beneath the temple is something the world was never supposed to see. The discovery that shook Lebanon. Baalbek is one of the most mysterious ancient sites on Earth. It stands in the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon, 85 kilometers northeast of Beirut. Even after thousands of years, its massive columns still rise into the sky, casting long shadows over the valley. The Temple of Jupiter, the largest of the complex, remains a masterpiece of engineering. Enormous stone blocks stacked with precision that continues to puzzle modern builders. It is a place that commands respect and curiosity. During a recent restoration effort on the temple floor, a group of archaeologists made a discovery that no one expected. While stabilizing a cracked section near the inner sanctuary, one of the stone panels gave way, revealing a narrow opening beneath. When they cleared the debris, they saw the entrance to a sealed corridor that appeared nowhere on any historical plan or map of Baalbek. Inside the passage, the air was cold and dry. The walls were made of limestone blocks so perfectly fitted that no mortar lines could be seen. Each surface shone under flashlight beams as if it had been polished like glass. The team called in specialists to document the find. As word spread, the site was surrounded by equipment and reporters. Within days, international teams from Germany, France, and the United States arrived, eager to examine what they called an impossible structure. Drones scanned the area, while archaeologists photographed every inch of the passage. Early reports suggested the construction methods used in this corridor were unlike anything known from Roman or Phoenician times. The deeper they explored, the stranger it became. Carvings lined the corridor walls, but none matched Latin, Greek, or any ancient script previously identified in the region. Some of the markings repeated in geometric patterns, almost as if following a formula. The discovery divided the research teams. Some believed the markings were decorative. Others argued they might belong to a culture predating recorded history. Then the instruments picked up something even more unusual: a hollow chamber directly beneath the sanctuary, about 30 meters below the surface. Ground-penetrating radar showed that the space was symmetrical and aligned with the temple's foundations. Engineers warned that continued drilling might damage the structure, but the data hinted that the chamber had been intentionally sealed. Soon after, the Lebanese Directorate of Antiquities halted all public visits to Baalbek. Officially, the closure was for safety. Unofficially, rumors spread that something about the readings had frightened the research team. Locals whispered that the ground beneath the temple was cursed. What began as a simple restoration had become a classified investigation, watched by scientists, governments, and those who feared what might be buried beneath the stones of Lebanon. As excavation continued under heavy secrecy, a new question began to form. Who built Baalbek before Rome ever reached it? A civilization out of place. Every theory that emerged was more unbelievable than the last.
Baalbek, as we know from the archaeological evidence, must have existed during the Neolithic period, between 6,000 to 8,000 years or even 9,000 years BC.
Some historians pointed to the Phoenicians, claiming the site once served as a temple to Baal, the storm god who was said to fasten the heavens to the earth. Ancient texts described his dwelling as a fortress built from stones that hum with thunder. It was easy to dismiss such stories as myth until the scientists realized that the carvings around Baalbek's base had once been struck by lightning again and again, as if the entire plateau had been charged with energy. Others turned to even older traditions. In early Canaanite writings, Baal was not alone. He was accompanied by the Watchers, divine builders who descended from the stars and raised foundations that could never fall. Later legends transformed them into giants, punished for revealing forbidden knowledge to humankind. The debate grew intense. Were these stories echoes of an advanced ancient civilization, remembered as gods by the people who came after them? Or had myth and science just collided by coincidence in the same patch of Earth? As the arguments continued, the researchers turned back to their work, determined to separate belief from fact. Once the corridor was secured, the team began working deeper into the lower layers of the site. The goal was to understand how far the foundation extended beneath the Roman temple. What they uncovered, however, did not fit any part of Baalbek's recorded history. Buried between the limestone blocks was a layer of compacted soil that held fragments of wood and charcoal. When the samples were tested, the results stunned the researchers. The radiocarbon dates came back as several thousand years older than the Roman period. That meant human activity had taken place at Baalbek long before the first Roman column was ever raised. At first, the team suspected contamination or error, but repeat testing produced the same results. The finding forced a re-evaluation of the site's timeline. It suggested that the Romans might have built their grand temple over an even older structure. Quiet discussions began among the experts. Some archaeologists argued it could have been a much earlier Phoenician sanctuary. Others believed it was evidence of a civilization still unknown to history. As the team cleaned the lowest section of the temple, the difference became clear. The upper stones were unmistakably Roman. Their chisel lines were sharp and even, showing the familiar marks of iron tools. But the stones beneath them looked completely different. The cuts were wide and smooth, with edges that appeared melted rather than carved. Under magnification, the limestone surface looked fused together, as if shaped by intense heat or pressure instead of hammer and chisel. The texture was glossy, almost glass-like in places. No known ancient method could have produced such an effect. As the excavations deepened, archaeologists began noticing symbols etched into the corners of several base stones. The markings were simple but deliberate, arranged in repeating patterns. Some researchers suggested they were construction guides, while others saw mathematical logic in their spacing. None matched Latin or Greek forms. The more they studied the stones, the clearer it became that two completely different technologies had touched this site, one Roman and one belonging to something far older. Among the team, a quiet name began to circulate. They called the unknown builders the first architects. The title was informal, yet it carried weight. It acknowledged what the evidence suggested, but no one was ready to say aloud that Baalbek's foundation might have been laid by a forgotten civilization. Then, as workers cleared soil along the deepest edge of the trench, a trowel struck something unexpected. It wasn't stone. It was curved, pale, and fragile. The site fell silent as brushes replaced tools. Within minutes, the shape of a human skull emerged from the earth, buried in a layer that should have been older than any human presence at all. The builders who never left. When the human remains were first uncovered, no one knew who they belonged to. The bones were found pressed against the quarry wall, twisted among fragments of stone. Some lay face down, others half buried under debris. There were no signs of ritual placement or organized burial. Whatever had happened here was sudden and violent. As more of the site was exposed, the picture became clearer. Tools lay scattered beside the bodies: stone mallets, copper chisels, and shattered measuring rods. It soon became evident that these people had been laborers, caught in the middle of their work when disaster struck. The excavation team began referring to them as the quarry workers who never made it out. According to early lab reports, faint metallic residue was found on the hands and wrists of multiple skeletons. The residue did not correspond to copper or bronze, but to a high-grade alloy rarely seen in ancient artifacts. Some researchers speculated that it came from advanced cutting or shaping instruments, although no such tools were recovered. Forensic specialists studied the bones and found clear signs of repetitive stress. The shoulder joints and lower spines showed wear consistent with heavy lifting and pulling. Many ribs were deformed from long-term strain, and both male and female remains displayed the same pattern of compression injuries. Whoever these people were, they had performed intense labor for extended periods. Yet one skeleton stood out. Embedded in the skull was a small iron implant that had fused perfectly with the surrounding bone. The precision of the insertion astonished the medical examiners. They described it as surgically exact, unlike anything known from the period implied by the site. When carbon dating results came back, the timeline shifted again. The bones were thousands of years older than the Roman era, older even than the earliest known civilizations of the Levant. The findings suggested that the workers had lived and died long before history began recording human settlement in the region. DNA tests deepened the mystery. The genetic markers did not match any known ancient population from Lebanon, Mesopotamia, or nearby cultures. According to one report, their genetic profile appeared isolated, as if they belonged to a lineage that had vanished completely. The excavation team grew uneasy as they pieced together the evidence. The arrangement of the bodies indicated a single catastrophic event. Rocks above them showed fractures, and the soil layers suggested that a collapse had sealed them instantly. It looked like the end had come without warning. Some scientists believed they were killed by a structural failure. Others whispered about something more, an accident involving forces the builders could not control. Whatever it was, it had ended their work in an instant. That night, the camp fell silent. Every theory led to the same impossible thought. Something had happened inside that quarry, something powerful enough to kill instantly and leave no trace. And if the stones had been there when it happened, maybe they had witnessed it. The stones that remember. At dawn, the scientists began testing the stones. If there had been an explosion, a collapse, or a release of pressure, the rock would have recorded it. Just like a camera captures light, samples were taken from the quarry and from the deepest sections of the temple's foundation.
We don't know why Baalbek was chosen as this specific site. It may well be some kind of special power place.
Everyone expected normal results. What they found instead changed everything. Under the microscope, the limestone looked wrong. Its surface wasn't chipped or weathered like ancient stone should be. It was smooth, glassy, and warped in places, as if it had been exposed to intense heat, hot enough to melt its outer layer. Some sections were fused together in thin, wave-like bands that no tool or chisel could have created. When the lead geologist reviewed the images, she said quietly, "These stones remember what happened here." The line spread through the team. It stopped being a figure of speech. It became the working theory. The next tests only deepened the mystery. When the samples were placed under observation, metal instruments began reacting strangely around them. Compasses drifted off true north. Small fragments of metal clung weakly to the rock as though drawn by static. At first, everyone blamed faulty equipment, but the readings repeated again and again. Somehow the limestone was carrying a charge. There was no reasonable explanation. It should have been inert. Some of the engineers joked that the quarry must have been struck by lightning. Others stopped laughing when they realized that no lightning strike could have created patterns this precise or lasted this long. When researchers examined the cut faces of the megaliths under controlled light, another clue appeared. Each block showed faint parallel lines etched into its surface. The grooves were perfectly straight, all angled toward the temple's center. They were so fine and consistent that they looked more like the scoring left by a machine than by human tools. Over spans of 20 meters, the stone remained flat within fractions of a millimeter. The engineers were stunned. One technician whispered that even modern laser cutters would struggle to achieve that kind of precision on such a massive scale. To test the density of the blocks, the team used acoustic sensors. When sound waves were passed through the stone, the readings began to behave in ways no one expected. The signal echoed, deep and rhythmic, resonating through the foundation like a low hum. Then something remarkable happened. The other blocks began to respond one after another, humming in harmony as if the entire site had been tuned to a single note. The noise wasn't loud, but it was alive. One of the scientists later described it as the sound of the stones remembering what they were built to do. By the time the tests ended, a new theory had taken hold. The heat damage, the magnetism, the perfect geometry, the resonance, all of it pointed to one possibility. The stones were not just building material. They were components of a system, designed to channel or contain energy that once moved through the site. If that was true, then the source of that energy had to be somewhere below. The scans showed a sealed cavity directly under the temple floor, a void large enough to hold an entire structure. The deeper sensors hinted at metal buried in the bedrock, but the signals were faint and incomplete. The only way to know for sure was to open it. And so, under the eyes of every major researcher on site, the team prepared to break the seal on a chamber that hadn't seen light in thousands of years. The chambers below. The discovery that the stones might have been part of a larger system left the team with one question: where did that system lead? Ground scans had already revealed a sealed chamber beneath the temple, but no one could explain its purpose. After several days of excavation, a narrow shaft appeared near the base of the foundation. When a small inspection camera was lowered through the opening, the first images came back in grainy fragments. Then the picture cleared, and the room fell silent. Beneath the Roman ruins lay a vast chamber carved directly into the bedrock. The walls were perfectly smooth and symmetrical, reflecting the camera light like glass. Every surface was coated in a thin mineral glaze that shimmered faintly, almost metallic. Despite its age, the chamber looked untouched. No cracks, no erosion, no signs of decay. It was as if the builders had known how to make stone resist time itself. When the team finally entered in person, the temperature dropped sharply. The air was dense and metallic, and their instruments immediately began to glitch. Compasses spun, sensors flickered on and off. At first, the malfunctions were dismissed as interference from the surrounding rock, until one engineer noticed that every disruption occurred in a repeating rhythm, exactly every few seconds. As the team surveyed the chamber, their flashlights caught something strange. Running along the walls were rows of metal fixtures embedded deep into the stone. They were perfectly spaced and arranged in straight lines that met in the center of the room. At first, the engineers thought they were decorative supports, but the pattern was too deliberate, too exact. The entire space looked like part of a single machine. One technician decided to test it. He placed a handheld scanner against one of the metal fixtures. The device beeped, then began recording a faint magnetic signal. When he moved to the next one, the same pulse appeared, only this time it was slightly delayed. The team ran more tests, moving along the wall until every instrument began picking up identical readings. The signals were repeating in rhythm, as if the whole chamber were beating like a heart. When the data was uploaded to the monitors above, the results stunned everyone. The readings weren't scattered or random. They formed a perfect spiral pattern that spread outward from a single point directly beneath the Temple of Jupiter. No one spoke for several seconds. Then one of the engineers whispered, "It's active. Whatever this is, it's still working." The air in the room felt heavier. Some of the team stepped back, afraid to touch the walls again. Others leaned in, watching the monitors in disbelief. They had come to study an ancient ruin, but what they had just found looked like the core of something alive. One of the physicists suggested a bold theory. The structure was generating and containing energy. The mounts worked like coils in an enormous electromagnetic network. It was designed to absorb and redirect stress from the Earth's crust, creating a stable field that protected the region from seismic activity. That could explain why Baalbek, despite sitting in an earthquake zone, had stood for thousands of years without collapse. The temple wasn't just built on solid ground. It was built on top of a stabilizing system that made the ground itself stronger. Further tests confirmed the pattern. Every time the Earth's magnetic field fluctuated, even slightly, the chamber reacted. The field inside pulsed back, as if answering the planet. The realization hit the team at once. The structure wasn't just ancient, it was still functioning, maintaining an invisible shield that had kept Baalbek standing while entire civilizations rose and fell around it. Then the readings changed. The pulses began to spike irregularly, rising in strength, then fading. The equipment flickered and died. For a few seconds, the air grew heavy, vibrating as though something deep below the surface had stirred. The lead scientist stared at the monitors, realizing what had happened. The chamber beneath Baalbek wasn't merely protecting the ruins, it was holding something back, and whatever had kept the valley stable for thousands of years was starting to fail. The disruption. For a few seconds after the vibration stopped, no one moved. The air inside the chamber hung still, thick enough to taste. Every instrument had gone dark, and the only sound was the steady echo of their own breathing. Then, from somewhere deep below, A low rumble rolled through the ground. Dust fell from the ceiling. The stone floor trembled, not violently but long enough for everyone to feel it, a warning that whatever they had touched was not finished. The tremor spread beyond the walls. Above ground at the base camp, cameras shook on their tripods and loose equipment slid across tables. One technician ran outside and saw ripples moving through the soil as if the earth itself had exhaled. It lasted less than 10 seconds, but when it ended, every eye turned toward the temple. Baalbek had stood for thousands of years, but in that instant, it looked alive. Inside the chamber, fear broke the silence. The team began arguing in hushed voices, each trying to explain what had happened. One of the geologists insisted it was a natural aftershock caused by their drilling. A physicist disagreed, pointing to the readings. The energy had not been random. It had followed a pattern, a pulse that responded to the planet's own field. "We didn't just trigger it," he said. "We interrupted it." Another researcher, still shaking, whispered a different theory. She believed the ancient builders had created the system to contain something deep beneath the valley, a slow, constant pressure from the Earth's core. "It wasn't protecting the ruins," she said quietly. "It was protecting us." The words hung in the air. No one wanted to believe it, but the evidence was there. The technology required to stabilize an entire region, to build stone that could resist both erosion and earthquakes, was far beyond anything known from antiquity. The realization unsettled everyone. If this forgotten civilization could design a mechanism that lasted thousands of years, what else had they understood that modern science did not? The lead archaeologist stood in the center of the chamber, staring at the lifeless instruments. "We might have broken something that was never meant to stop," he said. His voice echoed faintly, swallowed by the dark. They packed their equipment in silence. Some were afraid to leave, others afraid to stay. The air felt charged again, restless, as if the ground itself was waiting. When they emerged from the shaft, the valley seemed unnaturally quiet. No wind, no birds, only the weight of what had just happened. That night, as the team reviewed the data, no one spoke about reopening the site. The final readings showed one fact they could not ignore. The stabilizing field beneath Baalbek had collapsed. The structure that had kept Lebanon's mountains steady for millennia was no longer functioning. And one question haunted every mind in the room. When the next earthquake comes, what will hold the valley together? What do you think really lies beneath Baalbek? Ancient technology, divine power, or something far older than civilization itself? Share your thoughts in the comments.